Appreciate you all coming here today. So welcome. This is our first in a series that we're going to of engagement that we're going to announce at the end. I'm Jennifer Rupert. I'm the Resilience Officer here at the East Central Florida Regional Planning Council. Just to go through the agenda quite quickly, we're going to provide a brief overview where this came from. I think there's a bunch of people on here potentially that doesn't know some of the history behind it. So we're going to touch on that briefly, how we've laid the groundwork. Move into the details on our 2019 inventory expansion, go through our business as usual scenarios. If we just continue on this pace and tempo of work that's happening across the region, where does that put us? Where does it leave us? And then we're going to frame the climate action as we are seeing it come out in all of these numbers. We're going to discuss, touch briefly on health, pull back a little bit and talk about the bigger picture, and then on the integration and the next steps that we're hoping to take as a region. Real quick, for those who are unaware, our planning council is made up of 8 counties and 78 cities in the East Central Florida region. We are one of 10 regional planning councils in the state of Florida. We all do similar kinds of work, but essentially we provide technical assistance and are reflective of what you all have in local government, different departments. So we have emergency management, and we have economic development, we have a planning department, we have finance, and then we also have a focused area on resilience. And that's really where, and GIS, pardon me. And that's where the three of us live, who you'll meet today. This is the R2C team, focusing on all things resilience and sustainability. Marie, I'm going to kill it. Marie Prouse. Darn, I missed it. Price. The German always throws me off. Marie Preuss, she is brand new with the team for the last 4 months, and she's great. We have Adrian Leathed. He is been with us for quite some time now, and he's the brains and the data man behind all of the inventory that we'll be going through today. And I've already introduced myself. I'm Jennifer Rupert. So this is going to be that first quick engagement to kind of pull everybody back and go ahead and fill this out at your leisure. We're going to talk about resilience and then how the Regional Planning Council and even the Regional Resilience Collaborative came up to being and kind of grew up in a space. Back in 2017, our board and the region was really reeling off of the heels of Hurricane Irma as it passed through. And at that same time, the Regional Planning Council had been engaging with Brevard and Volusia counties on, what does resilience really look like out here and what does it mean for us? And was in the process of working through a resilience action plan for those 2 counties. If you recall, at that time, there was a statewide office of coastal resilience. That's where all the resources were going out there. And there wasn't a whole lot of attention to the inland communities. So everybody attributed resilience to a sea level rise issue. So when we started really talking about it, and on the heels of that action plan coming out for Brevard and Volusia counties, 3 really important things came out of that document. It was, for the first time, they defined resilience collectively and collaboratively, if you will. They came up with a unified sea level rise curve that both for on planning horizons and that all of the communities and jurisdictions were planning to. And in addition to that, it came up with action items, one of which was to pull that effort to the rest of the communities inland and really redefine how we can collectively look at these issues together. So similar to you, our board decided we really need to take a better look at this and collectively and do it together. After Hurricane Irma, every county in our region flooded, and it was the first time the board directed us, along with that action plan, to figure out what a structure and a framework would look like for a resilience collaborative in this region. And so it started. First question we asked, well, what does resilience mean to us? So similar to you all, adaptability, adaptation, that kind of roller coaster up and down, a comprehensive look, bouncing back and forward, decision making, all the similar definitions that you guys have come up with. We put together a steering committee and came up with the same essentially the same thing. Resilience to this group, the steering committee, was the ability to bounce forward, absorb, recover, and get better in the face of those shorter term shocks and longer term stressors that we have, including this long-term stressor of climate change. I think bouncing back as the typical definition, I think of all of our communities were kind of tired of going back to the same thing. And what does that mean? And how does it look like as we're moving forward? And what can we do collectively better together? The vision that was created at that time was to ensure a thriving and resilient future through comprehensive regional collaboration. So really redefining or doubling down on the on regionalism in this area. The structure that was developed through that initial steering committee was kind of to work under this resilience umbrella and through three pillars, that is people, places, and prosperity. People and moving a people-focused work through health and equitable practices. Place-based work was really focusing on the built infrastructure in our natural environment, and our prosperity was economic resilience. I think a step further than your typical resilience efforts, we really want to weave through each one of those pillars, reduction in risk and vulnerability in the region, as well as our carbon footprint. So that was the first time that our elected leadership said, no, we really need to not only move forward in those resilience and sustainable type efforts, but also reduce emissions at the same time. And we need to increase our sustainability goals. So today, the collaborative is about 44 partners, and we really focus on four essential things. We work to address areas of substantive strategic concern. We collectively come together and expand each other's capabilities and capacities by leaning on expertise that we have all across the region. We collectively look at unique partnerships and then funding mechanisms to move the work forward, and can collectively go better after funding mechanisms together. Speaking of leaning on the expertise of people across the region, with that framework that was laid out, or that the pillars, we very quickly established a committee to start considering what does a greenhouse gas inventory mean at the regional scale. We had about a handful, maybe about 10 folks or 10 jurisdictions that had a greenhouse gas inventory at that time. Everybody doing it a little bit differently. Some hired consultants. So there was no consistent measurements and way that the region can move forward. So initially led by Chris Casco with the City of Orlando and Katrina Locke with Volusia County, we essentially established a larger group of people to really hammer out the details. Today, this new iteration, we lean on the expertise of Lori Forsman and Zach Eichholz, both of which do this on top of their existing jobs. And all of these communities in this region have come together to really define how we move this project forward, and consistently provide time to do that and their expertise so we can all benefit. That committee initially established goals and strategies for how to what's the process we were going to work towards as a region to put this inventory together. We knew we wanted to develop it. We were going to try to not only look at this regional scale, but then do it on a municipal level as well. All to get us to the point where we are collectively capturing those numbers, understanding where we need to move forward. What does a science-based target look like for our area? Look at some high impact actions we can all take together, and then do assessments, all to the hope of getting to develop a climate action plan towards the end. So starting that work, we came to a consistent baseline of 2019 year that we were all going to kind of work from, or the region was going to measure against. We established consistently how we were going to measure and request data for the region. We established a unified platform for tracking, which is really through our ICLEI, the ClearPath tool. We built relationships with providers all across the region. We have, I think, 17 different energy providers across the region. And if you think about all the different people we need to engage, we really needed to take time to do that the right way. Collected all the data at the county scale and then aggregated it up to a regional number. So we were able to provide each county what their inventory looked like if they are interested in it. And this will occur every 3 years. And we do that through using activity data, so actual data and numbers of activity, and then a combination of Google EIE data as well. The first one was completed in 2021 with a very specific focus of looking at energy, transportation, and the waste sectors. At that next step that the committee outlined was to come up with a science-based target. We do this. It is 54.3% reduction with a 2030 goal from that 2019 number that we initially had. We did it to support where the US and the global goals were. We wanted to make sure we were always in alignment with the latest climate science, really laying out the vision for what we could do. And then come up with measurable and actionable pathways to reduce those emissions, and on top of that, drive innovation and a collaboration where it might not have been happening before. In the long run of that, to pull investment or a capital into the area, because we want to make sure we're reducing uncertainty and improving the region's economic competitiveness and health overall. At the same time, our board was considering all of this. Voted to become a GCOM member, which is the Global Covenant of Mayors. And when we joined that, they laid out a process similar to like a lead for cities or other processes that are out there on how to move forward from just an inventory to get to some action. So we're on target with that. We are in the process of doing that adaptation plan, coming up with goals for moving towards this more sustainable energy, and of course, addressing climate change mitigation and low emission development. And you'll see that throughout the morning. As this was all happening, there was a lot of federal dollars that had come down or became available to do the work. We were doing it as a council and pulling together the funds as we were moving along. We were able to secure that again with leadership coming from our MSA partners for this time. And we all came together. The Planning Council pulled in the funding so we can move towards putting together a climate action plan, a funded climate action plan, as we had already been directed to do so by our board. So that Priority Climate Action Plan was published in March of 2024, and that included the expansion of the 2019 inventory, which Adrienne is going to go into in a moment. It has projections that we utilized the old ones for the ones we turned in. It has reduction targets, quantified measures. We looked at the authorities to implement those measures. And then it did include a workforce planning framework, all with those high impact actions of decarbonization, reducing vehicle miles traveled, alt fuels, EV adoption, solar deployment, waste management, and also considering and embracing land use and forestry in our section. So I know I just ran through a bunch of slides very quickly, but I just wanted to pause a moment. And while we're saving questions to the end, does anybody have any thoughts or reflections at this time that they wanted to offer about all of that work that has happened to date, kind of that historical overview and the historical work that's been accomplished? Great. Well, then I am going to hand it over to Adrienne, who will take the lead on the details of the inventory.
Hi, everyone. My name is Adrian Ethed. As Jennifer introduced me, I've been kind of data crunching a lot over the past years and heavily involved in the greenhouse gas inventory and kind of writing up of the priority climate action plan, and then as we're moving forward into the integrated climate action plan. So this slide illustrates where the 2019 baseline inventory is at present. So we took the original inventory that was work that was carried out previously, which included the building energy, transportation and mobile sources, and also the waste sector, and then expanded that across different sectors, including the kind of process and fugitive emissions, adding in wastewater and wastewater, and then also the agricultural, forestry, and land use, and then adding in off-road as well into the transportation and mobile sources. So we can see from that, even with adding all of those extra sections in, building energy and transportation mobile sources are still the key drivers of emissions in the region. So those two combined account for 84% of the emissions across the region. And individually, obviously, you can see that building energy is at 45%, and then closely followed by the transportation and mobile sources at 39% of the emissions across the inventory. And we can see as well there's 59 0.7 sort of metric tons of CO2 being emitted across the region. So this kind of really lays out the kind of those activities that are driving the sources of emissions. So we'll kind of take a little bit closer look now into kind of what makes up those sectors and what is kind of the driving force behind those emissions. So if we go to the next slide. So we can see from this table, this is a little bit more split out. So we can see that the kind of building energy is split across commercial energy, industrial energy, residential energy. So that's all of the kind of energy that's used to power and heat homes, businesses, factories, all of that kind of activity. So we can see from that 24%, just under 25% of the building energy is from heating and cooling our homes. And then, as we can see, the transportation sector, if we kind of take a little bit more of a zoomed look into the transportation sector, which is a big part of emissions as well, at 39%, we can see kind of gasoline and diesel vehicles, which makes up the on-road part of that. And then also the rest of those categories are kind of made up from other mobile sources and off-road categories. So we can see that there are a diverse range of activities that go into these sectors, and it's kind of really now kind of looking at how do we look at those activities, and then if you change what the process of those activities, that can then address the emissions and pollutants that are emitted as we do that. So if we go to the next one, so this is again kind of zooming in a little bit further into just the transportation sector. So keep that in mind that this is 39% of the total inventory. What you're seeing on screen in terms of the chart and the table, that is looking at just transportation sector. So just looking at that, we can see that the on-road emissions are contributing 82% of that 39%. So again, the vast majority of emissions in the transportation sector is through vehicles traveling within the region, traveling from outside the region into it, and also people leaving the region as well. So there's metrics involved in accounting for all of that. Expanding that out to include the off-road vehicles. So we're talking construction equipment, aviation, lawn and garden equipment, pleasure craft, all of those different things. We can see that accounts for 18% of the transportation kind of that pie, part of the pie. And we can see those kind of divided out there. And we can see that of that 59.7 sort of million tons, 23.2 million tons of that is kind of made up from all of these different activities. And really, it's kind of then starting to think about how these are the kind of activities, and just this shows kind of the different levels of detail that we can go into behind all of the data to get at the what is causing the what is the activity that is creating these emissions and pollutants. So the next stage, what we did, we also compiled 2022 inventory. Whilst this isn't as complete as the 2019 inventory, as we are waiting for some data to be released to cover all of the different sectors that we've expanded to, just kind of going back to the roots of what this all started at, looking at the building energy, looking at the transportation, on-road transportation, and looking at the waste, we can see kind of changes from that 2019 baseline and then the updated 2022 numbers. So you can see building energy did increase as well as solid waste increase as well. But interestingly, the transportation part did fall by 5.87% when we looked at the figures overall, and that is generally driven by sort of remembering from the charts before that kind of on-road emissions are mainly driven by the gasoline vehicles. So we did see a slight reduction in the vehicle miles traveled by gasoline vehicles, which then sort of propelled that small reduction in that sector. So even though kind of when we look at diesel vehicles, that increased because that the vast majority of those are driven by the gasoline vehicle miles traveled, that was kind of enough to decrease that sector alone. But when we look at the whole picture, looking at that whole bigger pie, essentially the overall the emissions from those three sectors, when we add it all up, from 2019 to 22, the total emissions did increase by sort of 6.5%. And that's kind of really just kind of what we'll then do, obviously, moving forward is do these inventories every 3 years. And as we get the data received from the different sources that we collate it from, we'll update that. So we'll have complete inventories for 2022. And then obviously the next one will be 25. And kind of so we can mark the progress and kind of see how the different sectors are performing and changing emissions as we kind of go through into the future. So, Jennifer, you're muted.
Thank you, Adrian. It's fascinating that with a change in behavior, that we would see the drop, based on those 2020, kind of that COVID year, that change in behavior that we all got used to, those work from home habits, that it did in fact drop the transportation piece of the inventory. So can't thank you enough for all of your work on that data, and certainly with the support of Lori and the rest of the regional committee, Zach, to put all of that together. Thanks for all the hard work on that. So business as usual, with the pace and the tempo of the work that is occurring right now throughout the region, we were able to model and identify, well, where are we headed if nothing changes? If we don't have those changes in behavior like a COVID and shifting to working from home, what would it look like pushing us out to 2050? I've put our science-based target where that number should be for 2030, and you can see there's a significant gap in what we need to accomplish. So I think next logical and pragmatic question, certainly that our board was asking us, well, how do we get there? What are the next steps and what does that look like? So at that time, they had directed us to put together a climate action plan for the region, which is what we are in the process of doing. So if you haven't made it to the screen yet, again, in your Mentimeter, this would be the next question. And this is a part of a question taken from a survey that we've sent across the region, and have gotten some interesting feedback, I think, from where everybody's at. Everybody has, I think, a certain set of information that they pull from, and what are your top 3 reasons to reduce greenhouse gases? Why does this matter to the region, and why should we continue the work? So similar to you, as we think about the organizations that we work with, or think about this question from a personal perspective, we saw with the surveys that from an organizational perspective, the top choices were to improve air quality and to protect native biodiversity, right? And this is only a small handful of reasons that people, of selections that people had put into the survey. But from an organizational perspective, those are the 2 that came out. And the other one was a reduction of the impacts and the severity from extreme weather. So it's really this recognition from or an organizational perspective that these resources that we depend on as businesses in our area, we want to stop having these impacts, and we want to honor the resources that we depend on to make our business continue to grow. A third place was job creation, which makes sense from an organizational perspective. We want to, create jobs. We want to upskill and really focus on some new sectors like renewable energy, energy efficiency, and sustainable technologies. And we want to decrease energy costs. That was another one that they had said. And the last one of the lower ones that I'll mention today, at least, was a protection of water and land. So I thought that was fascinating from an organizational perspective. Shifting to the very personal, like if I'm doing it from Jennifer Rupert, citizen in this area, a lot of the responses we received were first, a reduction of those impacts, which was similar to what businesses said. They want to reduce the impact and severity of the extreme weather events as they're unfolding in our region. But also tied for number one was to protect the water and land, that which we depend on every day. The third, this is where it started diverging, if you will, from a personal perspective, people wanted to see global temperatures stabilize. I think from a personal perspective, people really get this and they're connecting the dots. They recognize the global temperatures are rising, they need to be reduced so we can lessen the impact. I think people are starting to put those connections together. And they want to, third, ranking was to protect vulnerable people and native biodiversity. I thought that was fascinating. And then it went down to air quality and so on and so forth. So I think even looking, it's reflected here in this slide. And if your answers came from that organizational perspective or from that personal perspective, they're somewhat different. It looks like a lot of people maybe were doing it from somewhat of a personal perspective, stabilize those global temperatures, protect the native biodiversity. We had a lot of kind of ties to reduce the impacts, protect water and land. So with this new, this perspective that we gleaned from these surveys that we put out, we really kind of started really thinking, well, how do we frame this a little bit more comprehensively as we're moving into put this climate action plan together? We have those priorities that were identified, initial goals and strategies through committee. We know we need to reduce vehicle miles traveled. We know alt fuels and EV actions will get us to where we need to go. We have to decarbonize the grid, energy efficiency programs, solar PV deployment, waste management, reduction, and land use and forestry practices need to change. Again, it not throwing those away, but really thinking about them from a little bit more of a holistic perspective. So we are kind of we're moving, not kind of, we are moving and organizing these in a way where we're really starting to think about what does a sustainable community and sustainable transportation really look like in the region, and connecting these emissions reduction activities into verbiage, I think, as local governments, a lot of us use every day. So reframing, if you will, climate actions into this way, we can operationalize them as local governments maybe a lot easier, and identify either this as a co-benefit or a direct, if we invest in these ways, we can reduce emissions. So sustainable communities and transportation, energy will be another broad category, agriculture, and natural systems is where we are initially. And this will all, again, go back and through committees, but this is how we are rolling it out today. So what does this mean when we're starting to think about it? And what does this look like in a little bit more detail? With the combination of looking at transportation and sustainable communities, it's really bringing it down to kind of a land use perspective. So these are the sustainable actions, or the actions that for reduction strategies that we really want to get behind and begin to start to measure with the new rollout of our platform that we utilize to really define how much EVs do we need to put on the road, how many fleet vehicles need to transition for alternative uses or alternative fuels, pardon me, and to electricity. So we're going to be able to put a tangible number on some of these as we move forward and really clearly define actions for the region. So this is what some of those are going to look like. So as we are starting to model these actions that we are defining and putting targets in place with clear numbers, what does it look like over time for us? This graph shows the reductions that we're proposing at this point in draft form by strategy. So you'll see solid waste there first. If we move forward with our solid waste target, it will decrease by this much through energy, that's decarbonization, and all the other actions that we have identified. It will go down this much, getting us all to our 2030 goals, so on and so forth through transportation. In addition, and in parallel to the inventory, the emissions inventory itself, we are also conducting a co-pollutant inventory, and this really leans into air quality. We are doing this as kind of a direct tie-in to health benefits across the region. The co-pollutants cover across all sectors, just like you saw in the data that Adrian was presenting. You have residential, commercial, and industrial, transportation, solid waste, all across the board there. And we're using NEI data for this. This information and data populates another tool that Marie is going to introduce you called from the EPA put out, and it's called COBRA. Not to overwhelm, but this really focuses on essentially 3 different co-pollutants for this tool, and that's the PM 2.5, NOx, and then the VOx, if you will, and I'll let Marie go into additional detail on how we utilize those. So I'll hand it over to you, Marie.
All right. All right, so COBRA is the Co-Benefits Risk Assessment Screening and Mapping Tool developed by the EPA. It estimates the impact of emission changes on air pollutants such as ambient fine particulate matter, known as PM 2.5, and ozone or O3 concentrations, and their corresponding health effects and economic impact. So what this means is you can run a scenario in which emissions are increased or decreased by a certain amount. COBRA then analyzes the changes in PM 2.5 and O3 concentrations between the baseline year, which is your business as usual scenario, and the control scenario in which you've adjusted the emissions. And then using a range of health impact functions derived from scientific literature, it estimates county level health impacts, monetizes the economic value of those health benefits, and presents the results in tables and maps. Next slide. So we ran a scenario to reflect our target of decreasing vehicle miles traveled by 25% in the East Central Florida region. So using the tools provided 2016 emissions as our baseline year, we entered a 25% reduction of co-pollutants, so PM 2.5, SO2, NOx, and VOC for highway vehicles in our 8 counties to represent that 25% decrease in vehicles on the road that are releasing emissions. COBRA adds a 2% discount rate to reflect the opportunity costs of investments foregone by investing in emissions reductions instead. And we run that scenario, and from our early analysis, these are some of the tangible people-focused benefits that we were able to identify for the region as a whole. So as you can see, there's over 14,000 school lost days avoided, over 1,500 work lost days avoided, 35 to 50 premature deaths avoided, 90 ER visits for respiratory issues avoided, and over 27,000 cases of asthma symptoms avoided. So some of those estimates have a range due to the differences in methods used by COBRA to calculate health impacts, for instance, different epidemiological studies. And like with any model, these numbers can shift as we refine our inputs to the model and meet with our committees and receive public comment in the coming months. But we wanted to share these preliminary findings that really help demonstrate why we should all care about reducing emissions.
Thank you, Marie. Um, kind of embracing that for a minute, that those very people-focused impacts in health, and with thinking again about the results that we found from the survey, I'm going to pull back to when we originally came to really define people, places, and prosperity. And what does that mean? As Marie transitioned us to thinking about the very close impacts and very relatable impacts from a health perspective, how is the work that we're doing, how are we looking at and considering those vulnerable communities that citizens have defined or prioritized as one of the reasons to do this climate action work? We worked through through committee to really build understanding and define what vulnerabilities we wanted to look at collectively as a region. And when we talked with business owners, or when we talked with leadership in kind of the place-based natural systems or transportation systems, those types of folks in that system, and then folks working in the people-focused work, the health people working in equity, they all defined similar drivers of vulnerability, if you will. It's housing, it's access, it's mobility issues, food, healthcare, all of these things. And we decided at that time, because we did find a lot of common ground in each one of those systems, to kind of define 32 different indicators as our drivers of vulnerability in the region. It really started at that time in around 2020 to define what that looked like for the region. We put all of these indicators and these data sets that were decided upon through committee into this dashboard that's publicly available for any organization to use. It provides data on a county basis and then does the comparison real time to what's happening in the region. The dashboard is updated yearly, and it's something we continue to invest in for a lot of partners and organizations across the region. So those indicators are all reflected as our drivers of vulnerability, organized in that framework or of those pillars of people, places, and prosperity. We also operationalized it then into a risk assessment that our region's emergency management directors had requested. It was one of their goals to pull together as a region. So they redefined risk to consider the threat from an all hazards approach, to incorporate those social vulnerability or those drivers of vulnerability, all those indicators into that section, and then look at the severity of the consequences, where we were able to ascertain climate sensitive hazards, and as well as Department of Health data, like the ones that Marie had mentioned, into these indicators from the Department of Health, these data points into this definition, and spatially represent it. So when we get into that severity of consequences portion of the equation, and consider heat as a hazard in, say, Seminole County on the right-hand side of your screen, heat as a hazard moved up in a ranking to number 2 on their list versus where it used to be a number 9 because of the new data sets we were bringing to light. It's spatially represented. It changed the way Seminole County approached some of their response. When this data was completed, they started deploying that summer cooling centers for the first time that I had seen it And it was directly related to a lot of these results, and they're being operationalized throughout the region. At that same time, again, operationalizing the risk assessment, the social vulnerabilities, the climate sensitivities, really going back to what that committee had said, looking for a climate vulnerability assessment. We added that economic component into this for flood. So really considering what this all looks like and what it means, how it's affecting our insurance, and what's the total risk and how do we reduce it. In addition to that, the R2C was also helping redefine what I call climate-informed conservation strategies across the region. We've conducted this in almost every county in our region and are currently working in Seminole County to kick this off, utilizing Mark-Sand modeling. And what it essentially does, it allows for communities to define their conservation strategies in a new and different way. And what we have found is that majority of people working in these spaces are really starting to look at ecosystem services, if you will, and conservation in a new way. So really thinking and highlighting or prioritizing land that can capture water or land that can recharge our aquifers and those types of things. So it's really redefining these conservation strategies. And I bring all of this up to tell everybody, as we're integrating and looking to try to hear and take and comment on all of this work that we're doing, we are going to pull together an integrated climate action plan. So all of that work that I just outlined very briefly, albeit to you, we're going to integrate those. So we will have those climate actions, those direct emission reduction actions, directly added to what that risk assessment tells us, where and what kind of people are being impacted consistently, and how can we get them the services and the tools that they need to become more resilient. So that's through that regional mitigation strategy. And then taking in that climate-informed conservation strategies across the region, really taking into account land use, land cover, and agriculture in new ways, and what's the carbon sequestration potential in those lands, to put together a comprehensive climate action plan for the region. So our next steps, because we didn't have enough time to go into the amount of detail that we wanted to today, we will be rolling out an engagement series over the next 5 to 6 months. You'll see some of the dates here. Each one of these, we're partnering with the Florida Solar Energy Center, some of who are on the call today, on conducting deeper dives into some of these actions as we've outlined them, so we can talk to experts, learn what's happening in those spaces, and then we will be releasing during that same month the climate actions as we have defined them for open for public comment. The series starts in March, the first one being on March 5th. It's called Electrifying Transportation there. That one is 1 hour long. There's a little link on the bottom or that QR code that you can register for that. And we'll also follow up and send out this series flyer for everyone. And we're going to be looking to learn certainly from the experts in the space, and looking for public comment with the correlating climate action as we are defining it. That will start rolling out, like I said, in March, and with it each month we'll be releasing an additional section of the climate action plan for public comment, all to be completed with that June in-person event that's going to be on the 6th. It's going to be in person at the Florida Solar Energy Center. And if you all haven't been there, it's a pretty fantastic place. The cutting edge research that they do, the partnerships that they have, they are the go-to in the state of Florida for a lot of things beyond even solar, but alt fuels and many other things that they do. At that time, we're going to close the public comment on all of these strategies that we're putting in place, and then take it back into our R2C committee. So Lori and Zach and that group will come back together and discuss all of the feedback and take it into account as we're finalizing and refining these strategies as we've defined them. And then they will make the recommendation to go to our full board or to a smaller council subcommittee board within the structure of the Regional Planning Council. They will review and refine over the next several months all the work that we are doing, provide direction that they would like to see the region go, and then the entire plan will go in front of the board sometime after that November timeframe. So November, December, we will be complete with board action. So I want to thank everyone for coming. I'm going to stop recording so we can kind of open it up for some additional dialogue and questions on this stuff. But if you require additional information or want to be a part of some of these committee phone calls and meetings as we have them, feel free to reach out and contact through the email addresses below for engagement and Cobra, Marie, for the data and the inventory, the brains behind all of this stuff and all the modeling efforts that we have. It's going to be Adrian, and for programs and this overall integration, and certainly the R2C direction as I kind of staff to that Regional Resilience Collaborative. Feel free to reach out and speak with me. And again, thank you so much for your time today.